The Age of Emptiness, How Meaning Began to Die. Soft ambient music plays. Slow pan over a crowded city. Neon lights flicker. Faces glow in blue light from their phones. A voice begins, steady, calm, yet heavy with awareness. Narrator, VO, we live in a world of endless information, and yet an absence of meaning. We scroll through oceans of content, opinions, and performances, all designed to keep us connected. And yet, we've never felt so alone. Carl Gustav Jung saw this coming. Long before social media, before the digital echo chamber, before we started measuring our worth in clicks and followers, Jung warned that the greatest danger to humanity wasn't war or famine. It was the collapse of the inner world. He called it the death of meaning. Scene transition. Images of the early 20th century, factories, wars, the rise of modern psychology. Narrator, VO, when Jung wrote about the modern man in search of a soul, he wasn't being poetic. He was diagnosing a sickness. A sickness born not from disease, but from disconnection. As the modern age grew louder with machines, politics and ideologies, something ancient went silent, the voice of the soul. For thousands of years, humans lived inside myth. Stories, symbols, gods, all these gave shape to our existence. We didn't just live in the world. We lived through meaning. But then came science. And science, in all its brilliance, did something extraordinary and catastrophic. It explained everything. Except us. Cut to archival footage of scientists, telescopes, circuits, nuclear tests. Narrator, VO, we learned how to split atoms, code computers, and map the brain, but not how to feed the soul. Jung saw this clearly. He wrote, "The gods have become diseases. Where once divine archetypes gave meaning to our inner life, now their energy turned inward, twisting into neuroses, obsessions, and addictions. The myths didn't die, they mutated. Zeus became the corporate titan. Aphrodite became the influencer. Ares became the algorithm. The pantheon of old gods simply changed costumes, and we started worshipping them without even knowing it." Scene shift, clips of people shopping, working, partying, scrolling, fast cuts. Rhythmic. Narrator, VO, in Jung's time, he saw the same pattern unfolding after World War I. An entire generation lost faith, not just in institutions, but in the idea of meaning itself. He called this the spiritual catastrophe of the modern age, because when faith dies, the ego rushes in to take its place. And the ego, Jung warned, is a poor god. We began to believe that if we just achieved enough, acquired enough, or knew enough, we could outrun the void. But the void only smiled. Because the void knows, the more you chase meaning outside yourself, the further you drift from where it lives. Cut to slow zoom into Jung's face, archival portrait. Narrator, VO, Jung once wrote, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own souls." He saw that the problem wasn't the world getting louder. It was us becoming afraid of silence. Because in silence, we meet ourselves. And most people are terrified of that encounter. The death of meaning isn't an event. It's a process, slow, invisible, seductive. It begins when symbols lose their power, when religion becomes ritual, when art becomes content, when the inner world becomes an afterthought. That's when the collective shadow begins to grow. Scene transition, visuals of the Great Depression, post-war recovery, then flashing images of today, Instagram, AI, politics, chaos. Narrator, VO, Jung's words echo louder today than they ever did in his lifetime. He predicted that as the outer world became more advanced, the inner world would become more fragile, and that the human psyche, deprived of meaning, would fall into chaos. We see it now, anxiety epidemics, identity crises, cultural polarization. Not because people are weaker, but because the world offers no shared story to hold us together. We've lost the thread. And when there's no story, everything becomes performance. The philosopher Nietzsche declared that God was dead. Jung understood the next line, and we have killed him. Not out of hatred, but out of neglect. Scene, a classroom. A teacher writes meaning on a whiteboard. Students look bored. Narrator, VO, ask a child today what gives life meaning, and they'll tell you followers, success, wealth, maybe fame. But Jung would ask, what does your soul say? And that question has become an askable dot because to ask it you have to slow down. You have to feel. You have to listen. And our entire civilization is built to avoid exactly that dot. We live in an economy of distraction, a religion of productivity. And the altar we kneel before is the algorithm. Cut to soft piano plays. The camera lingers on Jung's handwritten notes, sketches of Mendele's Archetypes. The Red Book, narrator, VO, Jung's life's work, all the dreams, symbols, and archetypes, was an attempt to restore the balance between the outer world of progress and the inner world of meaning. He wasn't against science or reason. He simply knew their limits. He believed that the psyche, your inner world, is just as real as the physical universe. And if ignored, it rebels. That rebellion looks like anxiety. It looks like burnout. It looks like the endless hunger to be seen, without ever feeling known. Scene transition. Once we built cathedrals to touch the divine. Now we build servers to store our selfies. We replaced confession with comment sections. And we replaced ritual with routine. The death of meaning doesn't announce itself. It creeps. It wears the mask of convenience. It speaks in the language of efficiency. But Jung knew the soul doesn't want convenience. It wants connection. It doesn't crave efficiency. It craves depth. Cut to, the modern person feels something missing, but can't name it. That ache, that restlessness, that quiet sadness that no achievement can cure. Jung called it the voice of the self, the true center of being. The part of us that knows we are more than our roles, our jobs, our screens. When we lose meaning, the self calls out. Sometimes through dreams, sometimes through breakdowns, sometimes through the quiet whisper that says, there must be more than this. And Jung would say, there is, but you won't find it out there. You'll find it in here. Scene transition. The death of meaning didn't happen overnight. It began when we stopped believing the soul was real. When psychology became a science of behavior instead of a study of being. When therapy became self-optimization instead of self-realization. We became cleverer, faster, louder, but emptier. And now, standing at the peak of human progress, we can feel the ground beneath us trembling. Jung's warning wasn't abstract. It was prophetic. He said, when the gods are gone, their thrones are occupied by demons. And those demons are now algorithms, ideologies, and collective rage. Closing scene of part 1. Meaning isn't something we can download. It's something we must remember. And in a world that worships noise, remembering has become the rarest act of rebellion, because Jung's greatest insight was never about madness or myth. It was about balance. The balance between light and shadow, progress and soul, outer life and inner truth. The death of meaning isn't the end. It's an invitation to rediscover what truly matters. He who looks outside dreams. He who looks inside awakens. Carl Jung. The shadow of modernity, Jung's prophecy for the future, ambient hum. Drone footage of megacities at night, grids of light like neural networks pulsing across the earth. Narrator, VO. Jung believed that progress always casts a shadow. Every step humanity takes forward in technology and intellect, in power, leaves something behind in the dark. We call it modernization. Jung called it psychic inflation. The idea that the more we expand outward, the more the ego believes it has become God. And when the ego becomes God, the soul becomes forgotten. Scene transition. Montage, assembly lines, data servers, satellites launching, people staring into screens. Narrator, VO. Jung lived through the birth of the machine age. He watched humanity swap myth for mechanism, faith for function. He saw what most psychologists of his time ignored, that this wasn't just social evolution. It was spiritual amputation. He warned, the greater the outward success, the deeper the inward loss. And today we're living inside that paradox. Never in history have human beings been more capable or more confused, more connected or more divided, more informed or more lost. Because information without meaning isn't knowledge. It's noise, scene, close-up of a phone screen, notifications exploding like fireworks. Cut to a person sitting in silence, staring blankly. Narrator, VO. Jung said that when people lose meaning, they seek substitutes, addiction, ideology, conformity, anything that fills the void. He called this the rise of the collective shadow. When an entire culture represses its pain, its fear, its emptiness, that energy doesn't disappear. It returns in disguise, as polarization, as fanaticism, as mass hysteria. He saw it happen in Europe before World War II. He said that when the individual loses connection to the self, the collective mind grows sick. And the symptoms? They look terrifyingly familiar today. Cut to political rallies, online outrage, mass protests. Quick cuts, faces shouting, screens glowing. Narrator, VO. We don't burn witches anymore. We cancel. We don't worship gods. We worship personalities. We don't confess our sins. We broadcast them for validation. Jung would call this the shadow made public. All the fears, insecurities, and desires we can't face within ourselves, we now project onto everyone else. And because we no longer have shared mythologies, there's no symbolic container to hold our darkness. So it spills out. Everywhere. Scene transition. Black screen. A low heartbeat sound. Then slow fade into a therapist's office. An empty chair. Narrator, VO. Jung didn't believe evil was a metaphysical force. He believed it was psychological, the part of ourselves we refuse to acknowledge. He said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. That's not just a statement about individuals, it's about civilizations. And ours is being run by the unconscious. The unconscious drives the algorithms. It decides what trends, what outrages, what sells. It feeds off emotion, and the emotion it feeds best on is fear, because fear keeps you scrolling. Fear keeps you consuming. Fear keeps you from looking inward. Cut to footage of social media scrolls, breaking news banners, doom scroll montages. Narrator, VO. Jung would say the modern world isn't evil, it's asleep. It's hypnotized by its own reflection. We've mistaken data for wisdom, connection for communion, and self-expression for self-knowledge, but Jung's entire psychology, the dream work, the archetypes, the individuation process, was a map out of this sleep. He believed every human carries a seed of meaning inside them, what he called the self, and the purpose of life is to bring that inner potential into consciousness. He didn't mean that as a slogan. He meant it as survival, because when meaning dies, nihilism rushes in to take its place. Scene. Visuals of protest signs. Existential quotes online. Depression statistics. Empty urban scenes. Narrator, VO. The 21st century didn't kill meaning through violence. It smothered it with distraction. We've turned every sacred symbol into a marketing tool. Every ideal into a brand. Jung predicted this exact trajectory. He wrote that if humanity continued to externalize its inner gods, it would drown in its own creations. He used the story of the sorcerer's apprentice, the magician who brings the broom to life to fetch water, only to lose control. That's us. Our brooms are algorithms, technologies, ideologies created to serve us, now ruling us. And Jung's prophecy is unfolding pixel by pixel. Scene transition. Calm visuals. A person walking in nature. Sunlight through trees. Narrator, VO. But Jung didn't believe in despair. He believed in transformation. He said the shadow, no matter how dark, contains the raw material for redemption. Because shadow is not the enemy. It's the part of us waiting to be integrated. He compared it to alchemy, turning lead into gold. Not literal gold, but psychological gold. The wisdom that comes from confronting your darkness, not avoiding it. If modern civilization is collapsing under the weight of meaninglessness, Jung would say, good. Collapse is what precedes rebirth. Scene. Old film of Jung at Bullingen Tower. Stones. Water. Calmness. Narrator, VO. He built his tower not as a monument to ego, but as a dialogue with the unconscious. He carved stones with ancient symbols, meditated on dreams, painted visions in the red book that terrified him, and through that confrontation, he found peace. He wasn't escaping the modern world. He was healing it. One psyche at a time, because Jung understood, you can't fix a civilization without first fixing its people. And you can't fix people by giving them advice, only by giving them meaning. Scene transition. Montage of therapy sessions. Art, community gatherings, spiritual retreats. Narrator, VO. That's why Jung never called himself a teacher of psychology. He called himself a physician of the soul. He believed the role of psychology wasn't to make people normal, but to make them whole, and wholeness, he said, only emerges when you face what you've avoided, when you meet your shadow, when you accept your wounds, when you stop performing for the world and start dialoguing with your own depths, because that's where meaning is born, in the tension between who we are and who we pretend to be. Seen footage of individuals journaling, painting, meditating, helping others. Narrator, VO, modern life tells you to fix yourself. Jung tells you to know yourself. Fixing is surface work. Knowing is transformation. And transformation begins the moment you stop running from your reflection. He wrote, the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely, because that's where freedom begins, not outside, but within. Scene transition. Every generation believes it's the most enlightened. But enlightenment without integration is illusion. Jung warned that if humanity continued to chase outer progress without inner growth, it would eventually become a machine that no longer remembers why it was built. He didn't mean this metaphorically. He meant it as psychological fact. When a culture forgets the soul, it becomes addicted to stimulation. And when that stimulation stops satisfying, the culture collapses. He saw this cycle in history, in myth, and the psyche itself. Creation, inflation, collapse, renewal, and he believed our era, the digital, global, hyper-connected world, was entering the collapse stage. But not as punishment. As initiation, Jung said, where love stops, power begins. And our world today is drowning in power, technological, political, social, because love has been replaced by control, but the psyche always balances itself. When one side goes too far, the other pushes back. Meaning may be dying, but that death is a call for depth, for silence, for rediscovery of the sacred within the ordinary, because you cannot kill the human need for meaning. You can only bury it, and buried things grow roots. Jung's warning wasn't a condemnation, it was a map. A way back to wholeness through the labyrinth of modernity. He told us the soul will not be denied forever. That when meaning dies, the psyche begins its revolt. And that revolt may look like crisis, but it's really the beginning of awakening. Because the death of meaning isn't the end of the story. It's the start of remembering who we are. Screen fades to black. Text appears, there is no coming to consciousness without pain. Carl Jung. The rebirth of meaning, Jung's hope for the future, soft choral tones. A sunrise slowly breaks over mountains. Mist lifts as the camera pans upward. Narrator, VO, at the edge of every collapse lies a hidden doorway. Carl Jung called it individuation, the process by which meaning is reborn through the individual soul. He believed that when civilizations lose their story, redemption begins not in parliaments or algorithms, but in one human heart at a time, because the psyche heals from the inside out. 1. The Inner Revolution, footage of people sitting in quiet rooms, journaling, walking alone through forests. Narrator, VO. Jung's answer to the death of meaning was not revolution in the streets, it was revolution in the psyche. He wrote, the world hangs on a thin thread, and that thread is the human psyche. He meant that every war, every addiction, every cultural breakdown begins as an unresolved conflict inside the individual. And therefore, every act of healing, however small, ripples outward into the collective. The future doesn't begin with policy. It begins with a conversation between you and your own soul. Dreams as messages from the future, cut to slow motion clouds. Dreamlike imagery, watercolor hues. Narrator, VO. For Jung, dreams were not random noise. They were the language of the unconscious trying to restore balance when the ego goes too far in one direction toward materialism, perfectionism, or despair. The dream compensates. It sends symbols, visions, and archetypes to guide us home. He urged us to record them, reflect on them, dialogue with them. Because within the chaos of a dream lies the architecture of meaning trying to rebuild itself, the modern mind. trained to dismiss dreams as nonsense, has silenced one of the oldest conversations between the human and the divine. Symbols and the sacred imagination, montage of cave paintings, stained glass, digital art threads connecting across time. Narrator, VO, Jung believed the imagination was holy ground. He said symbols are living organisms, they evolve, breathe, and adapt. When a culture's symbols lose life, its soul begins to starve, but symbols can be reborn. A song, a story, a work of art each can carry the eternal language of the psyche into a new age, that's why. Jung painted mandalas in his later years. Each circle was a self-portrait of the soul in motion, a visual prayer for wholeness. He knew that creativity isn't entertainment. It's medicine, and if our era has any hope, it lies in reclaiming imagination as sacred practice. 4. Facing the shadow collectively, footage of communities talking, reconciliation events. People from different backgrounds listening to each other. Narrator, VO, Jung's concept of the shadow was never only personal. He warned that humanity itself had a collective shadow. Everything we project, deny, or condemn is other. He saw that every ideology left, right, religious, secular, can become possessed by its own righteousness. He wrote, "Fanaticism is the shadow of conviction. To heal collectively means to face what we've denied together, our greed, our envy, our fear of difference. It means replacing moral superiority with moral curiosity, the next stage of civilization." Jung would say begins when we stop asking, "Who is to blame?" and start asking, "What part of me is this showing me?" 5. Technology and the new psyche, shots of AI, robotics, people wearing VR headsets, intercut with close-ups of human eyes. Narrator, VO, Jung never saw the internet, but he predicted its psychic pattern. He wrote of the coming collective mind that would connect humanity through invisible threads. He saw both the danger and the potential. He would say the digital world is an externalization of the unconscious. Every desire, fear, fantasy, an archetype projected into the cloud. If used unconsciously, it consumes us. If used consciously, it mirrors us. The task of the future isn't to abandon technology, it's to humanize it. To remember that behind every screen is a soul longing to be seen, not measured. 6. The return of the soul, footage of community gardens, children laughing, artists painting murals. Narrator, VO, Jung believed the soul would never die. No matter how sterile a civilization becomes, it retreats, waits, whispers in symptoms and synchronicities. He called this the compensatory function of the psyche, the way the soul balances excess. When society becomes too rational, mysticism returns. When it becomes too digital, embodiment returns. When it becomes too shallow, depth reemerges. We are witnessing that now, the quiet rebirth of depth psychology, mindfulness, myth, and meaning. It's not nostalgia. It's nature reasserting itself. 7. Individuation as sacred duty, candlelight flickers, inside Jung's bowling and tower. Gentle harp music, narrator, VO, to individuate, Jung said, is not selfish. It's the highest moral responsibility, because a person who knows themselves is less likely to project hatred onto others, less likely to follow mass hysteria, less likely to be manipulated by collective fear. He compared individuation to tending a small fire in the dark. "You may not light the world, but you prevent total darkness," he wrote. The better we understand our own darkness, the less we project it onto others. That sentence could save civilizations. 8. Wholeness and love, montage, people embracing, helping, moments of empathy. Natural light returns. Narrator, VO, in Jung's late letters. After decades of studying dreams and madness, he returned to one word again and again: love. Not romantic love, not sentimental love, cosmic love. The quiet recognition that everything and everyone is part of one unfolding self. He wrote, "The sole purpose of human existence is to kindle a light in the darkness of mere being. Meaning is not found by analyzing life like a puzzle. It's felt when we participate in life as a mystery, when we act with compassion instead of calculation. The opposite of the death of meaning isn't more data, it's love made conscious. 9. A new myth for a new age, wide cinematic shot of Earth from space. Auroras ripple across the poles. Narrator, VO. Jung believed every age needs a mythostory that tells us who we are and why we're here. The old myths of gods, empires, heroes served their time. The new myth, he said, would be the myth of consciousness itself, humanity awakening to its own depth. That myth is still being written. Each person who turns inward contributes a verse. Each act of awareness rewrites history from the inside out. Maybe this is what Jung foresaw, a species standing at the edge of chaos, realizing that its salvation lies not in conquest but in consciousness. 10. Epilogue, the return of meaning, fade to quiet piano. A candle flickers again, the same one from part 1, the flame steadies. Narrator, VO. The death of meaning was never final. It was a dark night of the collective soul. And night's end. The dawn Jung foresaw is not guaranteed, it must be chosen. Chosen every time we pause instead of react, reflect instead of judge, create instead of consume. He told us, we are not what happens to us. We are what we choose to become. So when the noise of the modern world grows unbearable, remember, meaning isn't lost. It's waiting. In your dreams. In your art, in your silence. In the small, human moments that no algorithm can predict, the music swells as scenes of everyday kindness fill the screen, friends laughing. Waves crashing, a child holding a parent's hand. Narrator, VO. Carl Jung's warning was never about doom. It was about awakening. He showed us that when humanity forgets its soul, it suffers, but through that suffering, it remembers. And perhaps the truest thing we can say today is this: we are not witnessing the death of meaning. We are witnessing its rebirth through us. Screen fades to black. Final quote appears. Who looks outside, dreams. Who looks inside, awakens. Carl Gustav Jung.